Decrypto is a game of limited knowledge and limited communication in which members of a team are trying to communicate specific keywords to members of the same team as the team of the opponent is listening. It's funny because it's limited communication, all communications are public, and so you're trying to intercept the communications of the opponent. Games of this kind, I'm trying to tell you something that is clearly enough but also ambiguous enough. There are many of those out there. And I have to tell you, Decrypto is a very strong one in this family. I have had this game on my table for a while, and maybe because, again, I was like, I don't know, that doesn't feel like a priority to play this game because there are so many out there that are similar. Also, for some reason, it's summer, some friends are away or out of town. I couldn't get 6 people around the table for a while. You can play with 4, but I wanted to get the full experience of like real teams fighting against one another. So as the game has been on my game table, on the side where I store the games that I want to play, but I haven't played yet, for a while. Finally, we got to try it, and we had a blast. My first thought was like, why did I wait for so long? This game is so good. This game is just, it has all the things that you probably like about games with limited constrained indirect communication, but it has some extra complexity, conceptual complexity. It stimulates lateral thinking more than other games. It has more strategy. It just feels like a meatier version of other games out there that are much more casual, much more party games. But oh my gosh, I'm getting ahead of myself. I'm anticipating too much of my conclusions here. So without further ado, let's take a closer look at Decrypto and how it works. The game is played in 2 teams, and each team needs to have at least 2 players. So 4 is really the minimum number of players here. The 2 teams are Team White and Team Black, as you can see from the different screens that they have. Also, each team has a separate deck of code cards. Again, those are color-coded. Speaking of color coding, also each team will use a sheet such as this one, which is double-sided. On one side, you write down the clues that your team uses to communicate, and on the other side, you will write down the clues that the opponent is using. You're making notes here, trying to figure out the keywords and therefore their code. Here you have this big stack of cards which are double-sided, and also each has 2 words. You can't see those very well now, but trust me, one word will appear when you insert the card in the screen this direction and another one this way. And then that's precisely what you do. At the beginning of the game, you get 4 cards from that stack and you place them inside. And you place them in the slots of your screen. Each screen has 4 number slots, and so the words that appear on the screens will be associated with numbers. In this game here, my team, Team Black, has Plague as 1, Sheep as 2, Cyclops as 3, and Dust as 4. These are interesting words. Now, as for game turn and game structure, the way the rulebook explains it seemed a little confusing to me, so pretty much we simplified the game. Basically, the turn structure as described in the book seems a little convoluted to me, mainly because it is meant so that 2 teams can play and communicate at the same time. We simplified it, so if you play with me and my group, it will be a team communicates and the other team is intercepting, and then the other team communicates and the other team intercepts. And if you don't know the game, those will make sense in a minute. It may look like there is a little bit of downtime that way, but we found that there is enough to think about, there are enough puzzles to solve as the other team is acting, that we found engaged all the time, even if we were playing sequentially, not simultaneously. So the teams will alternate being active or inactive. The active team is the one that communicates. The inactive team, so to speak, is the one that listens and makes notes. In the active team, a player will play the role of the Encrypter, and that changes each turn. Suppose now in my team, I am the Encrypter. I draw a card which will give me a sequence of 3 numbers that I'm trying to communicate to my other team members. I cannot show them this card, of course. Basically, to communicate 3, 1, 2 to them, I need to communicate Cyclops, Plague, and Sheep to them in that order. To do so, I'm going to give my teammates clues that are precise and accurate enough that they will be able to figure out what I'm referring to. And I'm also taking into account, of course, what else is available here. I'm giving clues that identify one thing, but do not create confusion with another one. And so I'm giving them clues that are accurate enough that they'll be able to figure out that I mean Cyclops, Plague, and Sheep, but not too obvious that the opponent will be able to figure out what they refer to. And we'll see how that works. So now I need to communicate Cyclops, Plague, and Sheep. And say, maybe for Cyclops I say 1. Per se is not particularly, may not mean like it has, you know, it's particularly relevant, but dust and sheep often associated with a bunch, with a collective number. The most famous thing we know about Cyclops is that they have 1 eye. Plague, I guess there's several plagues in history, so I would feel comfortable saying 1. Especially if then Plague and Sheep really identify other things. For example, for Plague, I say, well, death. It's a little easy. Again, Cyclops are deadly, but when they have the things, which one goes with which, I think that they will associate Cyclops with 1 and Plague. Or Middle Ages, or I don't know right now what else to think of. Those are, say 1, death, and fluffy. Again, there are a lot of things that are fluffy, but my teammates see the 4 available choices, and they probably think that Plague is not that fluffy. Or sleep. I had the Cyclops, Legend of the Cyclops had to do with him sleeping, but counting sheep. Counting, maybe that could be an idea. Anyways, suppose I went for 1, death, fluffy. My teammates write those down. So, incidentally, the rulebooks say that you can give any sort of clue, can be very elaborate. We like for the challenge to say that a clue must be a single word or 2 tops. And that's fun. That really made it tough. I suggest that you try that variant. What's important is that I'm giving these clues to my teammates, and the opponent also writes them down. The opponent writes down that they are white team, and they're writing down their black side. They're writing down 1, death, and fluffy. Then my team, based on that, tries to figure out the code. They identify that I meant Cyclops, Plague, and Sheep, and they write out 3, 1, 2. When they're ready, they say out loud, okay, we think you're trying to communicate 3, 1, 2. If that is correct, I show the card to everybody, we pass that round, hooray, and we discard the card and nothing else happens. If we made a mistake, then actually we get a miscommunication token. If you get 2 miscommunication tokens, you lose the game and the opposing team wins. Now, then the opponent goes. What is important, now my opponent writes down here in the bottom section of the sheet that 1 writes in the 3 category, and death or deadly writes it here, and fluffy they write it here. Next turn, maybe I'm trying to communicate this one, and I say white for sheep, allergy for dust. I don't think many people are allergic to Cyclops, and probably Plague and allergy don't go together well as much as dust, or old, or pawn shop. Okay, I'm gonna say white, allergy, white, allergy, and grease. And that's it, and my teammate says, 2, 4, 3. Point is now my teammates have figured out the code, hooray. But my opponent now has a category here would have 1 in grease. That's maybe interesting. And now they have white, white and fluffy, for example. So basically, after a while, they're trying to figure out what I have. And maybe they don't know the exact word, but they get a sense when they hear another word that it goes within a semantic field rather than another. And then, for example, another one maybe is like trick. And I'm thinking about Cyclops and Ulysses. But then they don't know exactly, but trick to them feels like it goes in Greece just because of the Greek meats more than it would go with fluffy and white. So, and that is the fun stuff, of course, that you're trying to look for words that do not immediately refer to one another. Obviously, they don't create consistent fields here, and maybe you're using different cultural references. You're taking into account what you know the opponents know. All the information needs to be public, but you may, of course, exploit things that you think the opponent specifically doesn't know. For example, my opponents knew that I come from Italy, and when they were trying to communicate pizza, they used the word layers. Because they knew as an Italian I would never associate pizza with layers. They could have said pineapple, and I would have been again like, pizza would be one of the last things that I can think of. So there are these interesting elements. If I say finder to communicate path, heck, for somebody it would be the most obvious thing, if they're seeing path as one of the things. For the opponents, if it's forest and finder, it may be obvious if they play role-playing games, otherwise maybe not. So there are several meta elements. I'm taking into account what my teammates know, what I think my opponents know, what I think my teammates will deduce from here, and also what I know that the keys that I give are forming the kind of like cloud of meanings that they are forming. Another thing, of course, is that after a couple of times when these fields start forming, when a team communicates, the other player can try to guess, because we get a sense that probably the first clue that you give corresponded to 3, and the second one to 2, and the second one to 1. Basically, if the opponent's team correctly identifies the code, they get an interception token. You gain 2 interception tokens, you win the game. And this is how the game works. You lose and the opponent wins if you mess twice. You win if you're able to intercept the opponent's code twice. So as I said in my introduction, I love Decrypto, and everybody that I played it with really loved it. At the end, we were a little bit drained just because the intensity of the experience was pretty strong, was considerable, but we were satisfied. If our brain were a little bit overheated, it was in a pleasant way, like after you go to the gym and your muscles hurt a little, but somehow you don't mind, and actually you feel rewarded. Now, the first game that we played was pretty short, actually, because we were not familiar with the idea and we started making silly mistakes, so a team lost simply based on messing up communication twice, which is a little anticlimactic. It can happen, I guess, but maybe just the first game that you play. After that, the players start to really getting into the idea, becoming more subtle. Also, within each team, players became more attuned to one another, more able to work synergistically and get a good sense of what is that my teammates know and the opponent, the opposing team does not know as well. And so the games lasted longer because now it was effective. The communication within a team was much more effective, and the challenge then became to be able to intercept. But again, also the other teams starting fine-tuning their analogic brain engine, that's a technical term that they just made up, and so they were able to figure out between analogies and commonalities of these groups of words and clues. Oh, that's what they meant, I see. And so it became what the game, in my opinion, is meant to be. The game should, and mainly because one team has been able to figure out the code of the opponent, which does not necessarily mean the exact words. That somehow gives me even more satisfaction when I don't really get an exact. I have not been able to exactly pinpoint the word. that corresponds to number 3 on their board. But when they're saying a word, I can get a sense that gets in that sphere, gets in that ecosystem of meaning, gets in that range better than it does in the range of word number 1 that maybe figured out exactly, and word number 2 that's a little bit nebulous, and word number 4 that I get a good sense of what it is. When you really figure out, I don't know exact words, but I think you're trying to do 1, 2, 4, boom, and it's right. It's a big payoff. It's also a game that to tell you how much it draws you in. You know those games that sometimes you kind of really feel that your heart is pumping, the heart rate goes up a little, not to the point that you are passing out, but you really get that tension. Those are good games. That means you're really paying attention to what you're doing. And the intensity when a player is trying to figure out the perfect code that will be crystal clear, or sort of kind of crystal clear to their teammates, but will confound the opponents. And then you say it, and then you're watching your teammates working on it, and you cannot say anything, of course, at that point, and you see that they're messing up, and you're there trying to keep a poker face, and then you see them that they're working out, and actually they figure out what you meant by exclusion, by working this or that out. When the communication works, it is really satisfying. It's not, I was afraid that was going to be a little bit trivial after a while, but oh, no, because the possibility of making mistakes always exists. As the game progresses, you feel more comfortable communicating with your teammates. You need to be more cryptic because the opponent has more clues to work on. And so just the game scales itself well. In the later phase of the game, you are better attuned with your friends, but the challenge is higher. So you always are excited when you're making that communication there, and worried about what's the opponent going to do. Again, just it's so intense that we got to the point where, when it was someone's turn to become the encryptor, be like, oh my gosh, my turn again. Oh, I can't do this. Okay. Let me gather my energy and I'll try to do this. Not to the point of how it feels to say to be the spy in Spyfall. It's another game of weird communication, of constrained communication, and we're having a hard time playing it because the emotional distress for the person being the spy seems to have become too intense. I have players that says, I cannot play it unless you guarantee I'm not going to be the spy, and I'm like, hey, that's not kind of the point of the game in Spyfall. You need to not know who the spy is. Anybody could be like, and it's like, no, I can't do it. It's just too stressful. Now, Decrypto hits a soft spot there because it's stressful enough that I really want to do well. It's a nice challenge. If I get it right, it's satisfying. If I get it wrong, oh well, I got one miscommunication token. It's not the end of the world. As opposed to in Spyfall, you make a mistake, everybody sees through it, boom, and that session of the game is over and you lost because of that one thing. That's very stressful. Here, you feel a bit more comfortable. Actually, you can choose your level of comfort. At the end, you see that the opponents are kind of behind. They haven't intercepted anything. And maybe I'm going to play it a little bit safer. I'm going to give my teammates clues that are easier to understand at the risk, of course, of giving more information to the opponent. And then also it's just fun to see, of course, the creative things that people come up with. We have a case in which the word was exorcism, and the clue that was given was backwards. And just because the other words didn't fit, I thought, oh, backwards is, I'm thinking of the scene where she's walking like a spider backwards down the stairs. However, it's only the director's cut. Another player was thinking about the head going backwards, or somehow they look like when you're possessed you speak backwards. I don't even remember that was what the original Encrypter had meant, but it worked. Another time, one of the clues that an opponent gave was candy, and maybe another was like something like Europe, and I thought, oh my gosh, a land, because Europe is a land and candy land. It's fun to come up with, of course, with the lateral thinking analogy, and it's fun to boom, seeing it, that haha moment when you're solving a puzzle, when you're solving a nice little problem. So much fun that came from the intellectual engagement, both of the fun of figuring out how to encrypt things just at the right level of complexity, the fun of trying to decrypt what the opponent does, the tension that during gameplay, of course, did I get it right? Did I get it wrong? Did I encrypt it too easy? Did I encrypt it too hard? The tension that, again, just feels right. Enough to really make you want to pay attention, to really keep you engaged, but without turning into an unpleasant feel. Decrypto, we were all immensely impressed. We're going to have a game night soon, and I'm going to try to get it to the table. I'm trying to get enough friends because this was such a good game. We had such a good time. We really, really enjoyed it. I highly recommend Decrypto if you like games about communication such as Spyfall or Codenames. Try this one. Try this one. I can't think of a negative thing to say about it because it was just so immensely fun and we all enjoyed it so much. Decrypto, highly recommended.